Okay, welcome to another episode of the China-MENA newsletter author series. I'm very happy today to talk to my friend Yuting Wang, who's a professor of sociology at the American University of Sharjah. Yuting wrote, I believe, in 2020, a fascinating book. I'll put a link on the page show, Chinese in Dubai, Money, Pride, and Soul Searching. It's a really great book. Yuting, thanks for joining us today to talk about it.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for having me.
No, it's a pleasure.
It's nice to catch up and then reconnect with the book because it came out 4 years ago. Time goes fast.
It
A
does
lot
go.
of things have happened, yeah, between
Yeah,
then and now. So
so much in the Chinese community in Dubai since 2020 has
yeah,
changed a lot. Um,
yeah.
for me, I love this because, as you know, I do political science. So usually when I'm thinking about China and the Middle East, it's usually from an international relations perspective or an econ perspective or poli-sci. So to read a book about sociology, looking at the human story, I thought was really, really wonderful. Um, so just first, why did you choose this topic to write this book?
I think this came not as naturally as many people would assume because I don't consider myself a China scholar. Uh, when I started graduate school, I became very interested in the intersection between religion and global migration because it was, up to a moment in the US, 2001, 9/11. So I became just naturally drawn to the experiences of minorities, religious, ethnic minorities. So my dissertation topic was about immigrant Muslims. So very, very different from this project that, captured by the book we're talking about. But I had the opportunity to come to the UAE and then work here. My interest in religious minorities and migration, global migration just continued. So because, the time that I came was just right after the financial, downturn in the US. 2009 was a difficult time for everyone. The UAE was ahead as well. So start to kind of, see the dynamics on the ground and the Chinese are coming in. They're actually very prominent in terms of, the drug mart, on all the commodity trade. And so, and then it dawned on me that, because there's, it's such an interesting community. So even though I'm Chinese, right, I don't know as much about them as would assume. So I became interested, and then that's when we started paying attention. But I didn't start the project until much later, a few years later. 2013, I started thinking about projects that really sort of focus on the transnational trade network, looking at entrepreneurship, looking at and the intersections between religious minorities and that transnational trade network. Specifically about the Muslim minorities here in the UAE, Chinese Muslims. And then from there, I embarked on a bigger project about Chinese community overall, and that just tap into some of these new dynamics, right? That start to really have a strong impact on China UAE relations, which is the BRI that we're talking about. So it was not planned. We didn't know it was rolling out, but then was just one thing after another. And then I was just led to this project, sort of, by all of these social forces, global forces that then converge here in the region.
Oh, that's the best kind of research project, one that you kind of stumble into and find something really
Yeah,
interesting, right? So,
yeah. But I still don't think I'm a China scholar in that sense. So my focus is still about transnational migration. But then often sort of people often reach out me thinking that I'm a China Middle Eastern relations scholar, but I'm not. I'm not. But I'm learning. So I've really had a lot of fun learning and interacting and collaborating with people like you. People in political science, economics, and history, and so on. So it's been a fantastic journey.
it's funny you're saying you don't consider yourself in that community, but your book is helping people understand, the dynamics of it. So, if you got this
Mhm.
foundational work and you're going like, oh, I'm not really, oh shucks, I'm not one of the, you're like one of the most important voices in it, but you're being very honest.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. But I'm really happy to see that, after this book came out, there were an increasing number of young scholars who are interested in the topic. So I started getting emails, inquiries from PhD students, master students, even postdocs who are interested in China, Middle East, and also now paying more attention to the dynamics between China and GCC, especially China-UAE bilateral relationships. So they found my work interesting. And like you said, it's not this kind of, a book or a project that explored the geopolitical order, but then I was situated there. So it's kind of, opened up the conversation somehow,
Sure.
because it's so relevant to um, the research of a lot of people who come from different backgrounds.
No, I see the same. I see a lot of students getting in touch these days. And I can see, when I started doing my PhD on China and the GCC countries, I think it was in 2010, and it was really easy to kind of get a grasp on all of the literature because there was almost none out there. And there really wasn't a lot of work to do. So it kind of felt like there's a lot of freedom to explore. And what I'm seeing now is just this huge wave behind us of young scholars who are coming to do really interesting work on this. And I think like in 5 or 10 years, it's just going to be like this abundance of really great work that I'll not be able to keep up with. That's going to totally surpass, the stuff I've been doing. It's pretty cool to watch.
Yeah, exactly. Recently, I've heard some young scholars examining the flow of labors into the region. And in my book, I acknowledge that is a weakness in my research because I didn't have access to that kind of data. Didn't have the networks, and then it wasn't the focus of my research in any case because my interest was still sort of, very firmly kind of, anchored in the field of global migration, but then, paying more attention to the experiences of religious minorities. That's why, the title of the book, soul searching. So there's a lot of discussions about, religious identities and organizations and etc. So that has been, a major part of my own academic training and my interest. Um, so those kind of new projects and a focus on the subpopulations that are not really, captured in existing studies will be really, really, insightful, very valuable for us to understand this multi-layered dynamics in
Sure.
China, UAE. Yeah.
It's one of the things I think that maybe our listeners who aren't in the UAE, which I assume is most of them, one of the things they probably won't be aware is just how substantial the Chinese population here is. So it's a country of between 9 and 10 million people. I teach all Emirati students. When I talk to them about the size of the Chinese community here, they're always shocked because you can get quite siloed into your own communities, whether they're, religious or ethnic or national or whatever here. And you may not see it very obviously, especially here in Abu Dhabi. You're in Sharjah, you spend a lot of time in Dubai, where it's a much
Mhm.
bigger Chinese community. So we hear anywhere between 250 and 400,000 Chinese living and working in the UAE, which is by far the biggest in the Middle East. Um, what do you see like when you're researching this book, when you're walking, through the Dubai Mall, when you're walking along the Dubai Creek, what is the Chinese community in the UAE? What are they doing? What are their careers? What brought them here?
That's, a question that many people ask, and then many people find it difficult to get the answer accurately because, in fact, we don't have that kind of accurate data to work with because the Chinese community is very fluid.
Yeah,
People come and go. There's a lot of fluctuation because most of them come here for business purposes, right? The entry to the market, the bar, let's say, it's low. It's easy to come here and people find ways to create their business projects, but then, the market is also brutal. Some of them do survive, others don't, right? So you have this kind of impression that, there are a lot of Chinese and waves of them, but then you don't really have an accurate understanding of, where are they, what do they do? And then, what's their, sort of ultimate goal to have any long-term plan here. So I also had those questions when I started building the project. I think, the data ultimately came from the embassy, sort of a Chinese embassy has their own account. And then so we get these numbers from the speech by the consul general, for example, right, from various sources. And then data is always hard to come by in the UAE, as we all know, right? Especially hard for sociologists who wanted to get their hand on data. But a lot of the data is just not available to us. And so we had to rely on these sources to understand the scope and the scale. But I think, one thing we know is that, the Chinese population has grown so rapidly. It's exponential growth, especially if we compare, the number in the 1990s to now, it's merely like 3 decades. We're already seeing such huge growth. So this is undeniable. So I think, if we care about the trends instead of the accurate number, and then we have a very clear trend. Chinese are here, they're coming now. It's no longer this sort of, outcast or, borderland, so to speak. It's becoming more central in the Chinese imagination. In many ways, I think it's about imagination. For many people, they never thought that, Middle East or UAE will be a destination. It is now, however, a viable destination, especially for a younger generation. It's on their map, it's on their mental map, so they're coming. In terms of the population itself, I think we also notice some very major characteristics, such as the professional diversity here. I think there's always this kind of assumption that everyone is involved in small commodity trade. They have small businesses. Dragon Mart is the face of China here. That is still true to a great extent, but then there's a huge, diversity as well. We start seeing, startups in social media, in alternative media, and then we start seeing some more, high-tech development here. Chinese entrepreneurs are bringing in new things, very advanced ideas into the region. Then you have, scholars, still small, but then they are here. They're becoming more visible. And you have, these technical fields, engineers, and then so they're coming in. We have artists. So a lot of people probably find it difficult to imagine, Chinese artists, right, working here in the UAE. But we do have some good examples to show that because Dubai's policies to promote Dubai as a city for creative class, some young Chinese people also seeking out opportunities here. So I think this works, both ways. And then China has sort of, stepped up engaging with the Middle East, and then the Middle East is also, especially here in the UAE, presenting itself as a viable destination. So we've seen that kind of change. And then another characteristics will be, the younger population is growing. The longevity of Chinese community is expanding. In the 1990s and then even early 2000s, and then it's hard to imagine, right, anyone who would bring their family here and then have a long-term plan, but it's becoming a reality today. I had recently I was just, working on a project looking at second generation or maybe 1.5, generation Chinese expats here. I did a rough count of how many schools in Dubai, and then also had some anecdotal data sort of collected from parents and so on about the distribution of Chinese students in these schools. And so we're seeing actually more and more Chinese students from the primary school to secondary school now are very well embedded in this society. So they're making friends across different racial ethnic groups. They're here for a longer time now. So they build the bridge, so to speak, between the Chinese community and then the very diverse, expat communities here in the country. So those are the three things I think are very useful to think about.
Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting stuff in there. But one thing that I was thinking about was when you said Dragon Mart. So I came here in 2006, and I think that was kind of generally when people thought of China in the UAE, they thought Dragon Mart. And the idea was small businesses coming to make a quick fortune and then go back home. It
Yeah.
felt or seemed it was being described as quite transient and short term. But I think one thing that's super interesting was it in 2021, it was during the pandemic when the Chinese community school, I'm not sure if that's the name, but the school in Dubai, the Chinese
Yeah.
International School, right?
It's called Chinese School Dubai.
Right. But it's like, isn't it the
I think, yeah.
first international Chinese national curriculum school anywhere in the world?
Yes, national curriculum. I think that's the the highlights. Because you might have all sorts of educational institutions, but then they're not the this kind of formal projects sponsored by the Chinese state. I think the school in Dubai and the Chinese school Dubai is the first one, and that's past breaking. I have to say, it's a sort of a historic moment there. China is expanding its educational sector into a global arena, and this is the first one that has official sort of support from the states itself, and the national curriculum, bilingual. Those are all sort of new experiments for the Chinese providers, the educational providers. So it's very exciting to see it's growing and establishing itself in the region.
Yeah, but just the existence of that school really does a lot to dispel the notion of transience because, here in Abu Dhabi, like the British school, the American school, these indicate the existence of a community, right? Where kids will grow up and they'll have, this sense of belonging. And for China to do that in Dubai, I think it really does speak to how important, this community is.
Yeah, it was actually surprising. The first cohort of the Chinese school in Dubai had more than 200 students. It was during COVID. So imagine, opening a new school
Mm.
during the high time of COVID, and it was all the lockdowns, quarantine policies, but then they pulled it off. They had a good intake, and then it's steadily growing in the subsequent years. Um, but as any new school, there are always all sorts of challenges. And then because they started in the primary stage, and then their middle school, it's very small right now. I think last time I checked that they offer a couple of classes at the year 7. So some families have decided to move their kids out of the school to other, more established secondary schools. But then primary school is becoming stronger. So I think with time, it will also, establish a strong secondary section. And then with that, going forward, I think, the school is going to have its strong roots in there. And then maybe there will be other educational enterprises establishing themselves. So maybe the private run educational enterprises here, I mean, in the region.
Yeah, I think the other thing I was thinking about while you're describing just the diversity of the Chinese community here is a few months ago, I did a workshop or I guess a conference at New York University in Abu Dhabi, and it was looking at GCC China relations. And the audience was probably about 80 to 90% Chinese. The
Mm.
auditorium was packed, but it was largely packed with Chinese people. And I thought, what are they doing here? And a lot of them had graduated from NYUAD and had gotten jobs. A lot of them worked in tech, a lot of them worked in media, a lot of them some worked in fashion. Like it was just a really broad, it was normal. It was just normal to see a bunch of people doing lots of different types of things. And it wasn't, yeah, like this idea, like everybody here is working for a state-owned enterprise or
Mm.
opening a small shop. Just it was a very broad upper middle class, cross section of Chinese people who have made a living here. And when I asked people what drew them to the Emirates, like, why did you come halfway around the world to a region that's typically seen as, somewhat unstable? I mean, everybody had kind of positive descriptions when they were describing the country, the region. It was kind of like the opportunities it afforded, the adventure, the cool travel. Um, I don't know. It's just it's a really I guess normal is the way I think of it. It's kind of seen as exotic by my students, and it
Yeah, I think, I think this has a lot to do with economic development inside China.
mhm.
And this new generation Chinese, especially, those who were born in the 1990s, and now, in 2000s, this generation, this batch, and they are very adventurous. They are forward looking as well. They like to take risks. So I mean, for these younger people, I think traveling, getting to know a different culture, immerse themselves in different culture, is something that has become very normal for them. It's something unthinkable for earlier generations because the focus has been on survival. So this new generation, they are very much comparable to uh, the people, sort of globally. There's a global culture of exploration. So I think they fit very well with that generation, and this cannot be achieved without that kind of economic development inside China, and also the global education and that they were able to access. So now Middle East is a new playground. They're here. It's not, anything that different from the young, American or European kids who are looking, to expand their horizon in other parts of the world.
So this maybe isn't fair because you said you're not doing China and the Middle East broadly, but do you see any comparable Chinese diasporas anywhere else in the region? Do you see like pockets of opportunity where that's drawing a lot of Chinese people to certain countries or cities?
It's interesting that, the Chinese people inside China, this is based on some of my readings and then also some of my own research and then some anecdotal sort of, stories. I can see that people are diversifying their choices for destinations of global migration, whether short term or long term. In the past, it was very unidirectional. Everyone's trying to go to, the North America, Australia, Europe, but then now, the younger people, they're very open to new ideas and to new regions. So I think, that diversification has already happened among the younger generation. So, and then it is not difficult to imagine that, when they look at economic opportunities in this region, and they will be drawn here. So you start seeing the formation of this very viable, very vibrant, resilient Chinese community with this young, professionals in all sorts of sectors. And today, actually, I saw that there's a Chinese designer actually working for Sharjah Performing Arts Academy, fashion designer, and so on. So you start seeing these young artists coming here, right? They find ways to incorporate their work and then really sort of take advantage being this kind of new phase in the entertainment industry in the region, and then so they can tap in. So those are a lot of opportunities, and I also find that kids who grew up here, then they tend to come back here. So I think that longevity is also quite evident. They're not leaving the region. They don't see this region as something temporary. Maybe their parents continue to look at this region as temporary,
Right.
but the younger generation are much more globally oriented. So wherever there are opportunities, they will be seeking out these opportunities, and where they are exactly, like the location is not of utmost importance to them anymore. So they're very dynamic. They're very mobile, I would say. This probably also because that China now is a much stronger economic entity in the world, and then they're much more confident about their personal choices. They now have more freedom to choose.
One thing that I notice teaching my students who are all in the early 20s, which means they were all born in this century, when I
Mm.
say China, their perception of China is typically as a very developed, global superpower or economic superpower. They typically have very positive perceptions. I was born in 1975, so the first time that China really crossed my radar and I became aware of it was Tiananmen. And when we thought of China as in my generation, we typically didn't have the same kind of positive correlation that young people today do. So I imagine you would hear some different ideas. I'm coming back to this because when I went to Taiwan the first time back in 1998, it was very unusual for Taiwanese people to see foreigners walking around the streets. And often people will come up and want to practice English and ask where I'm from. And, it was very cute. Um, this place is different because it is very cosmopolitan. People from all over the place are here. But maybe anecdotally, what do you find from, young local people when they come across you and your family and they're like, Do they come to you with positive preconceived notions about China? Do they know much about it? Are they practicing their Chinese with you? Do they follow you through the Mongol?
No, it's very interesting because the experiences can be quite multifaceted here, because this region, as you said, correctly, it's very diverse. It's a cosmopolitan place, so people have seen enough others. I think they're just normal part of life, right? No one is this kind of, even if you're a numerical majority, you may not be the political majority or social majority or cultural majority, right? So in terms of that kind of that relative status quo, and it's very interesting to see how people respond to each other. Here, if you're looking at Emiratis, especially the young Emiratis, uh, the state played a very important role in socializing them, right? So their worldviews and are very much built during the time that UAE is seeking sort of more neutral stands in global politics, but then seeking out these alliances that would benefit and promote the country's economic development. So I think they're very thoroughly socialized into this. So they find China friends.
Mm.
Uh, they have very positive attitude toward China. And something that you probably found, at Zayed University and here in our institution, we're very diverse, and we only have 20% Emirati students. But then among the Emirati students, I feel that their attitude is definitely much more positive toward China than students from other parts of the world who happen to live in the region. So their idea about China is not the same. There's a divide between the locals and then others.
Do you find that they know much about China, though? That's one of the things when I talk to.
No, they don't actually. They have this very superficial understanding of China. They're very
Mhm.
no, sorry. My screen escaped me just
Oh,
now.
yeah.
So maybe a gesture or something.
Yeah.
So what I was trying to say is that their understanding of China is very superficial, right? So they have this very sort of strong and positive outlook of China-UAE relations, and then they understand that China is economic power. But learning Chinese is not easy, right? And then the 2018 initiative to launch, Chinese classes and incorporate that into the curriculum is still very recent. So the younger ones in high school, I think now they know more. For example, my daughter told me her Emirati friend in Abu Dhabi actually is very familiar with Chinese social media. And in that, we're talking about kids of, 15, 16 years old, right? So in college right now, we also see that kind of incoming cohorts, students at 17, 18 years old. They are more curious about China. They have taken one or two, uh, lessons, about Chinese, or maybe they have already sort of taken a semester of Chinese course, Mandarin course in high school, right? So they came in with a stronger interest in learning about China. But the older generation are not there. They have a general idea, but they don't have the tool to understand China. They're still reading mostly processed information produced in Western media.
Yeah, so that's interesting, I think, because I think like in everything, we're going to see a big generational shift, probably from my students to their children, by the time their kids have cycled through the education system here and they've had more familiarity with the language, they've learned something about the culture, just more exposure to Chinese media, Chinese movies. It'll maybe
Yeah.
be a little less foreign.
Yeah, but interesting thing is that, even though now students in public schools in the UAE are taking Mandarin lessons in high school, but then there's no provision or not enough provision of Chinese um, language lessons, or China studies courses at the university level. And so when they enter university, and unless they go abroad where they can get access to some China studies courses in Western institutions, in the UAE there's not enough provision there. there's no effort to develop. So, for example, this Asian Studies program or China Studies program, we don't have this kind of provision for students. So they are curious, they are interested, but that curiosity, interest not met with this kind of institutional efforts to continue providing knowledge for them. So they had to seek out, but then sometimes I feel like they feel a little bit helpless, right? Where can I learn more about China? Do I have to travel to China to learn more? So, but of course, traveling is easier today. So I think that kind of spontaneous interest will have to be somehow supported by institutional efforts if that needs to, if they want to take this further.
Well, they could always travel to Sharjah and go to the AUS and take and read your great book. Yuting, I could talk with you about this stuff all day, but it's late
Yeah.
here. We've both been teaching all day, and I know you've got stuff to do as well. So thank you so much for this. I really recommend people who want to learn more about just Chinese communities in the region. This book is a great primer. You did a great job with it, and thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Okay.